In the quiet provinces of Thailand, where spirit houses stand beside modern roads and incense smoke curls through the humid air, the living and the dead are not separated by distance, only by memory. Some bonds are formed in love. Some are sealed in fear. And some are spoken beneath witnesses older than time itself. When a promise is made before the earth, the ancestors, and unseen spirits, it does not vanish with death. It waits. This is the story of a vow that endured beyond the grave, and the ritual meant to sever it. Chapter 1. The woman no man could keep. In the humid outskirts of Ayutthaya, where the air hung thick with the scent of wet earth and incense smoke drifting from roadside shrines, people spoke Molly's name only in lowered voices. She was 26, beautiful in a quiet, unsettling way, the kind of beauty that made strangers stare a second too long, as if trying to remember where they had seen her before. Her skin seemed untouched by sunlight, pale against her dark hair that fell like a funeral veil over her shoulders. Men were drawn to her. They always were. None of them stayed. The first had been a university student who fell deeply in love within weeks. He began waking in the night, gasping, insisting someone was standing beside the bed. 2 months later he drove his motorcycle into a concrete barrier on an empty road. Witnesses said he never braked. The second stopped answering calls after claiming he heard breathing behind him whenever he spoke to Molly on the phone. His family found him sitting in a dark room, whispering apologies to someone who was not there. The third vanished. No goodbye, no message, only his shoes remained neatly outside Molly's apartment door, wet with mud that did not belong to any soil in the neighborhood. After that, people stopped asking questions. But they watched. They noticed how stray dogs whimpered when she walked past, how temple bells trembled faintly without wind, how the jasmine garlands she hung at her doorway wilted overnight, petals blackened as though burned. At night, Molly lay awake listening to the silence of her small apartment. And then, inevitably, she heard it. Breathing. Not her own. Slow, patient, resting just behind her left ear. If she held her breath, it continued. If she turned suddenly, there was nothing, only the dim outline of her wardrobe and the faint glow of streetlight seeping through the curtains. Some mornings she woke with dark bruises circling her wrists, as though fingers had tightened there while she slept. Other times, the pillow beside her bore the faint indentation of a head that had no body. She stopped dating, stopped answering unknown numbers, stopped sleeping with the lights off. Still, each night at precisely 2:13 a.m., her bedroom temperature dropped. Her breath turned to mist, and the air thickened with the smell of damp rope and old wood, the scent of something that had waited too long in darkness. One evening, as rain hammered the corrugated roofs outside and thunder rolled across the fields, Molly stood before her mirror, studying the exhaustion hollowing her eyes. For a moment, she thought she saw another reflection standing behind her. A tall shape, motionless. The outline of a man's shoulders. And something hanging loosely from his neck. She spun around. Nothing. When she turned back to the mirror, a faint mark had appeared just above her collarbone, a thin, dark line, like the shadow of a rope pressed against skin. That night, for the first time, she did not hear breathing. Instead, a whisper brushed the edge of her consciousness, soft as damp earth falling onto a coffin lid. You promised. Molly did not sleep again before dawn. And in the village, beneath flickering shrine candles and watchful ancestral spirits, an old fear began to stir, the fear of a bond that death itself had failed to sever. Chapter 2. The man who saw what followed her. By the time Molly agreed to visit the spirit master, she had not slept properly for 12 nights. Dark crescents hollowed beneath her eyes. Her hands trembled without reason. Even in daylight, she felt as though someone stood just beyond her peripheral vision, patient, unmoving, waiting for her to notice. It was her grandmother who insisted. There are things medicine cannot touch, the old woman said, tying a thread of blessed white cotton around Molly's wrist, and things the dead refused to release. They traveled before sunrise, leaving the paved roads behind and entering a stretch of land where rice fields gave way to tangled trees and stagnant canals. Morning mist clung low to the ground, refusing to lift even after the sun had risen. No birds sang. At the end of a narrow dirt path stood a wooden house on stilts. Weathered gray and leaning slightly to one side. Spirit flags hung from the eaves, their faded cloth stiff with age. Beneath the house, dozens of clay bowls, broken mirrors, and offerings long since rotted lay scattered like forgotten promises. This was where Ajahn Somchai lived. No one in the surrounding districts spoke his name casually. Some said he had once been a monk. Others claimed he had studied under forest hermits who spoke with spirits older than Buddhism itself. He opened the door before they knocked. He was thinner than Molly expected. His skin drawn tight across high cheekbones. His eyes sharp and unblinking. Sacred yantra tattoos crawled up his arms like living script. He did not greet them. He looked only at Molly. The air inside the house grew noticeably colder. "Come in," he said at last. The interior smelled of camphor, candle soot, and something faintly metallic, like old coins soaked in water. Amulets hung from ceiling beams. Animal bones and prayer cords lay coiled on a low altar. A cracked bronze mirror leaned against the wall, its surface darkened with age. Ajahn Somchai gestured for Molly to sit. Before she could lower herself onto the woven mat, he spoke again. "Do not turn around," he said. Her muscles froze. She had not heard anyone enter. Yet the hairs along her arms rose as if someone now stood directly behind her. Her grandmother gripped her hand. "Master," the old woman whispered. Ajahn Somchai's gaze remained fixed on the empty air behind Molly's shoulder. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then the oil lamp flame beside the altar bent sharply, as though pressed by a slow exhale. The temperature dropped. Molly felt it, a presence leaning close enough that the fine hairs at the back of her neck stirred. Her chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to look. "Do not turn," the Ajahn repeated, his voice harder now. Something brushed lightly across her shoulder. Not wind. Not fabric. Fingers. Cold and damp, trailing downward as if reacquainting themselves with a body long remembered. Molly gasped. Behind her, the wooden floor creaked under an unseen shift of weight. Ajahn Somchai reached for a small bowl of ash and murmured words too low to understand. He flicked the ash toward Molly's back. A sound erupted in the room, not loud, but dense, like a rope snapping under immense tension. The pressure vanished. Warmth returned in hesitant waves. Molly collapsed forward, breath tearing from her lungs. Her grandmother began to cry. For the first time, Ajahn Somchai's expression changed, not surprise. Recognition. He studied Molly's face with something close to pity. "When did the dreams begin?" he asked. Molly struggled to answer. 3 months ago." His jaw tightened. "And the men who came before, they heard breathing?" She nodded. Silence stretched between them, heavy as storm clouds. At last he spoke, each word deliberate. "You are not alone," he said. His eyes drifted to the darkened corner behind her. "It has followed you through more than one lifetime." The oil lamp flickered violently. From somewhere deep within the house, wood groaned, as though the structure itself had shifted under an unseen weight, settling in to listen. Ajahn Somchai reached for a length of white thread and began tying intricate knots. "We do not call what binds you a spirit," he said quietly. "We call it a vow." Outside, the mist thickened, swallowing the path by which they had arrived. And though no wind stirred the hanging flags beneath the house, they began to tremble, one by one.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The reflection that was not hers. The house seemed quieter after the presence receded, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the stillness left behind after something decides to wait. Ajahn Somchai did not speak for several minutes. He finished knotting the white thread, then tied it around Molly's wrist with deliberate care, tightening it until she felt the pulse in her veins press against the fibers. "This will not protect you," he said. "It will only help you remain here." Molly did not ask what he meant. Instead, her eyes wandered toward the cracked bronze mirror leaning against the far wall. Its surface was uneven, darkened by oxidation and streaked with age. She had the uneasy feeling that it was not reflecting the room so much as remembering it. The Ajarn followed her gaze. He hesitated. Then he rose and carried the mirror to the center of the room. Her grandmother shifted nervously. "Master, is that wise?" "If she is bound," he replied, "it will not hide." He positioned the mirror so Molly faced it directly. "Sit straight," he instructed. "Do not move. Do not look away, no matter what you see." A stick of incense was lit and placed in a bowl of ash before the mirror. Smoke curled upward, thick and slow, carrying the scent of resin and something bitter, almost medicinal. Ajarn Samchai began murmuring a low chant, not Pali, not Thai, but a rhythm older and more uneven, like words worn smooth by centuries of repetition. At first, Molly saw only herself. Her pale face, the exhaustion hollowing her cheeks, the faint rope-like bruise shadowing the skin near her collarbone. The incense smoke drifted across the mirror's surface. Her reflection blurred. The room behind her darkened in the glass before it darkened in reality. Her grandmother's form became indistinct. Ajarn Samchai's chanting grew slower. The air thickened. A faint ringing filled Molly's ears, as though pressure were building deep beneath the earth. Then she noticed it. Behind her reflection, just beyond her shoulder, the darkness in the mirror did not match the room. It was deeper, denser, as if something stood within it, blocking what should have been empty space. Her breath caught. "Do not move," the Ajarn warned. The shape clarified. Shoulders. A torso. A man standing impossibly close behind her. Molly felt no breath on her neck, no touch. Yet in the mirror, the distance between them was intimate, possessive. Her heart hammered so violently she feared she might faint. The figure's clothing resembled traditional garments from another era, the fabric hanging stiff and dark as though perpetually wet. The skin of his throat was discolored, bruised in a deep ring that encircled his neck. A length of rope hung loosely from it. The face remained shadowed. The incense smoke thickened, swirling around the figure without obscuring it. Molly's fingers twitched in her lap. The rope swayed slightly. Not with wind, but as if responding to breath. The ringing in her ears sharpened into a thin metallic tone. Then, slowly, the figure lifted its head. Where the eyes should have been, there were only dark hollows, depthless, absorbing the candlelight. Molly's lungs refused to draw air. The mirror's surface rippled. The figure leaned closer. The rope tightened. A crushing pressure closed around Molly's throat. She clawed at her neck, gasping soundlessly. Her grandmother screamed. Ajarn Samchai flung a pinch of ash at the mirror. The chanting broke into sharp syllables, forceful and commanding. A violent crack split the air, like wood snapping under unbearable strain. The pressure vanished. Molly collapsed forward, coughing, dragging air into burning lungs. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her throat. Behind her, the mirror shuddered. A jagged fracture spread across its surface. When Molly dared to look again, her reflection stood alone. But the rope mark on her skin had darkened to a deep violet. Her grandmother sobbed prayers under her breath. Ajarn Samchai stared at the cracked mirror, his expression grim. "It sees you," he said quietly. His fingers brushed the fractured glass. "And it remembers." A faint line of condensation appeared on the mirror's surface, as though someone unseen had just exhaled against it. The oil lamp flickered violently. From somewhere inside the house came a slow dragging sound, like coarse fiber being pulled across wood. Molly pressed her hands over her ears. But the sound did not stop. Chapter 4. The Vow Beneath the Tamarind Tree. No one spoke for a long time after the mirror cracked. The house seemed to shrink inward, its wooden beams holding their breath. Even the insects outside had fallen silent, as if the land itself were listening. Molly sat hunched forward, her fingers still pressed against the bruised ring around her throat. Each swallow burned, each breath carried the faint smell of damp rope and stagnant water. Ajarn Samchai did not offer comfort. Instead, he fed a new stick of incense into the ash bowl and watched the smoke coil upward, his eyes following its slow unraveling. When a spirit lingers, he said at last. It is usually because of unfinished grief, or unfinished hatred. The smoke twisted. But what binds to you is neither. Molly forced her voice out. Then what is it? The Ajarn looked toward the cracked mirror. A promise. Her grandmother began whispering prayers again. Faster now. Ajarn Somchai reached beneath the altar and withdrew a bundle wrapped in faded saffron cloth. When he unfolded it, a brittle palm leaf manuscript lay inside. Etched with thin, dark script, the characters were ancient, their edges blurred by time and touch. This region was once a military outpost, he said. 2 centuries ago, soldiers were stationed along the river routes. Many died far from home. Some died without rights. Some died with their hearts still bound to the living. He dipped his finger into a small bowl of oil mixed with ash and drew a yantra mark in the air before Molly's forehead. The oil smelled faintly sweet, and underneath it, unmistakably, like earth after rain. Close your eyes, he instructed. She obeyed. The air thickened immediately. The Ajarn's voice shifted into a low cadence, each syllable resonating deep in her chest rather than her ears. Images rose unbidden behind her eyelids. Moonlight. A wooden house raised above flooded ground. Lanterns swaying in warm night wind. She was standing barefoot on packed earth, wearing silk heavy with gold thread. Her hands trembled beneath the weight of ceremonial bracelets. Around her, women whispered while fastening jasmine garlands into her hair. A wedding night. Joy should have filled her chest. Instead, dread coiled in her stomach like a living thing. The scene shifted. Outside, beneath a towering tamarind tree, a young soldier stood waiting. His uniform was simple, his posture rigid with hope he did not dare express. A ceremonial sword hung at his side, polished though worn. His name rose in her mind with painful clarity. Prosert. His eyes softened when he saw her. He stepped forward. You came, he said, voice thick with relief. Her heart pounded, not with love, but with terror. I cannot stay, she heard herself whisper. The lantern light flickered violently. Prosert's expression collapsed inward, confusion giving way to something deeper, more fragile. You promised, he said. Behind him, the river wind rose. I was young, she replied, stepping backward. I was afraid. The garland slipped from her hands into the mud. I will return, she insisted, though even in the memory she knew the lie forming. Prosert did not move. His breathing became shallow, uneven. You swore before the spirits, he said, before the ancestors, before the earth that heard us. Her retreat quickened, the mud sucked at her feet. Lantern light stretched into thin, trembling lines. I cannot, she said again. She turned and ran into the darkness. The memory lurched forward. Dawn light, villagers gathered in a tight ring of silence. The tamarind tree stood motionless in still air. A rope hung from one of its thick branches. Prosert's body swayed beneath it. His face had darkened, his neck stretched at an unnatural angle. His bare feet hovered inches above the ground, toes pointed toward earth he would never walk again. No one spoke. A woman began to wail. Wind stirred the rope, turning the body slowly, as if ensuring every witness saw the cost of a broken vow. The image dissolved. Molly's eyes snapped open. She collapsed forward, sobbing without understanding why the grief felt older than her own life. Ajarn Somchai's face was drawn tight with severity. He did not release you, he said quietly. Outside, the wind rose through the trees though the air remained heavy and still inside the house. He died with your promise still bound to his spirit. The oil lamp guttered. Molly's throat tightened. What does he want? She whispered. The Ajarn's gaze did not waver. What was sworn before earth and ancestors cannot be forgotten, he said. A slow creaking sound answered from somewhere beneath the house. Like a rope tightening under weight. He does not want revenge. The Ajarn continued. The cracked mirror gave a faint tick, as though cooling after great heat. He wants what was promised. The temperature dropped. Molly felt it again, that closeness behind her shoulder. Intimate and patient. Waiting. Outside, beyond the stilts of the house, something shifted in the mist. And though no wind moved the trees, A length of unseen fiber scraped slowly across wood, as if drawn inch by inch toward the door.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Dreams That Bled into Morning. That night, Molly slept in her grandmother's house for the first time since childhood. The old wooden structure groaned softly with the cooling of evening air, its walls breathing out the scent of dried herbs, candle wax, and thyme. Outside, frogs called from the flooded fields, their rhythmic croaking usually a comfort, a reminder of ordinary life continuing. Tonight, their chorus seemed distant, muffled, as though heard from underwater. Her grandmother had placed protective charms at the doorways and tied white sacred thread along the window frames. A small Buddha image faced the bed. Incense burned until the room filled with a thin veil of smoke. "Sleep," the old woman whispered. "The spirits cannot harm what rests in faith." Molly nodded. But when the oil lamp was extinguished and darkness settled over the room, sleep did not feel like rest. It felt like falling. She stood barefoot in mud. The air was thick with the smell of wet soil and river water left too long in the heat. Lantern light flickered somewhere behind her, casting weak gold reflections across standing puddles. She looked down. Her feet were bare and caked in dark red earth. Not clay. Darker. Thicker. Each step made a soft sucking sound as if the ground were reluctant to release her. She wore ceremonial silk again, heavy, damp, clinging to her skin. Jasmine blossoms hung limp in her hair, their sweetness turned sour by rot. The night around her was vast and soundless. Then she heard it. A rope dragging across the ground. Slow. Measured. Behind her. Her breath quickened. She did not turn. The sound continued. Fiber scraping against mud, then against stone, then against wood. Closer. She began walking faster. The mud resisted, clutching her ankles. The dragging sound did not hurry. It did not need to. A faint indentation appeared in the wet earth beside her footprints, long, narrow grooves forming with each step taken behind her, as if the rope were carving its path toward her. The air grew colder. Mist gathered at ground level, coiling around her calves. Then came the breathing. Not at her ear. Not behind her. Above her. Slow and labored, like lungs that no longer remembered how to live. She stopped. The rope stopped. Silence swelled until it pressed against her skull. Against every instinct screaming through her body. Molly turned. At first she saw only the tamarind tree rising from the mist. Its branches twisted like arthritic fingers against a starless sky. Then she saw the rope hanging from one thick limb, swaying, though the air was still. The lower end brushed the mud. Wet. Dark. A drop fell. Then another. The rope twisted slowly. And the body descended. Not falling. Lowering. As if guided by invisible hands. The face emerged last. Skin discolored. Eyes hollow. Neck stretched and bruised where fiber bit into flesh. Prossert's feet touched the mud without leaving footprints. His head tilted slightly, as though studying her. The rope tightened with a soft fibrous creak. Molly tried to move. Her legs would not obey. Tried to scream. Her lungs refused air. His mouth opened. Mud seeped from it, thick and dark. A voice came with it, not from his throat, but from the rope itself. Fibers vibrating with sound. "You left." The ground beneath her feet softened. She sank ankle-deep into the mud. Hands, pale, waterlogged, half-formed, pushed upward from beneath the surface, grasping weakly at her ankles as though begging her not to flee again. "You promised." The rope slid across the mud toward her. Its end twitched, searching. She felt pressure brush her throat. Molly woke with a scream tearing from her chest. She was sitting upright in bed, hands clawing at her neck, lungs dragging air in sharp, panicked bursts. Her grandmother rushed into the room, lamp shaking in her grip. "It was a dream," the old woman whispered, though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. Molly looked down. Her feet were wet. Dark mud streaked the wooden floorboards beneath the bed. The room smelled of river earth and stagnant water. Her grandmother froze. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the frogs had stopped calling. In the suffocating silence, Molly became aware of another sound. From just beyond the bedroom door. A slow dragging. Fibers brushing against wood. She held her breath. The sound continued for several seconds, then stopped directly outside. The sacred thread tied across the doorway trembled. Not from wind. From pressure. Something testing its strength. The thread pulled taut. Then slowly relaxed. Minutes passed before Molly dared to breathe again. At dawn, when the door was opened, the thread remained unbroken. But a faint line had been pressed into it, as though something rough and narrow had drawn across its length again and again through the night. And on the wooden threshold below it lay a thin trail of damp earth, leading away into the morning light. Chapter 6. When daylight failed to protect. Morning should have brought relief. Instead, it revealed evidence. The thin trail of damp earth on the threshold had dried into a dark, brittle line by sunrise, flaking like old blood against the wood. Molly crouched beside it, unable to look away. The soil was not from the yard, it was darker, almost black, and smelled faintly of stagnant water and something mineral, like stones dredged from a riverbed long undisturbed. Her grandmother swept it away in silence. Neither of them mentioned how the broom bristles trembled. By late morning, sunlight flooded the house, filling the rooms with a warm golden haze. For a few fragile hours, the world appeared ordinary again. Vendors' voices drifted from the road. Motorbikes rattled past, and somewhere in the distance a temple loudspeaker recited midday chants. But the normal sounds felt thin, like a recording played in an empty hall. Molly noticed the first sign just after noon. The brass bowl on the family altar began to vibrate. At first, the movement was subtle, a faint metallic tremor, barely visible. Then the vibration intensified, producing a thin ringing note that seemed to pierce the air rather than travel through it. Her grandmother turned sharply. There was no wind. No passing truck. The bowl rang once more and then fell silent. The house felt colder. Ajarn Somchai arrived unannounced that afternoon. He did not step inside immediately. Instead, he paused at the threshold, eyes fixed on the lintel where the sacred thread still hung. His expression tightened. "It has touched the boundary," he said. Molly felt her stomach drop, but it did not cross. The Ajarn's gaze shifted to the faint groove pressed into the thread. "It is learning," he replied. He entered at last, carrying a cloth satchel that released the dry scent of herbs and old paper. From within, he removed small talismans wrapped in palm leaves, a vial of cloudy oil, and several iron nails blackened with soot. "These will reinforce the protections," he said, "but understand, protections delay. They do not end." As he worked, hammering the nails discreetly into doorframes and window corners, the air grew heavy, as though humidity had thickened into something nearly solid. Sweat gathered at the base of Molly's neck despite the chill creeping across her skin. "Spirits bound by grief linger," he murmured, pressing oil into the wood. "Spirits bound by hatred pursue." He paused, then drove the final nail into place. "But a spirit bound by vow returns." The nailhead rang sharply against the wood. From somewhere beneath the floorboards came a soft answering sound. A slow scrape. Molly's breath caught. Ajarn Somchai froze, listening. The sound did not repeat. Yet the silence that followed felt occupied. Late afternoon clouds rolled in, swallowing the sun. Shadows pooled in the corners of the house earlier than they should have. The air thickened with the metallic scent of impending rain. Molly stood near the window, watching the rice fields ripple under a wind she could not hear. The world beyond the glass seemed distant, flattened, as though she were observing it from the far side of deep water. Then she saw it. At the edge of the flooded field stood a figure. Too far away to see clearly, yet unmistakably human in outline. It did not move. Rain began to fall, stitching the air with silver threads. The figure did not seek shelter. Water struck it and ran off without altering its shape. "Molly," her grandmother called from the other room. She blinked. The field was empty. Only wind moved across the water. By evening, the house had grown oppressively cold. The protective threads trembled at intervals too irregular to be caused by drafts. The iron nails in the doorframes emitted faint ticking sounds, as though contracting in extreme cold. Ajarn Somchai lit additional incense and placed it at the four corners of the main room. Smoke thickened the air until each breath tasted bitter. "It is closer today," he said quietly. Molly hugged her arms to herself. "Why now?" The Ajarn's eyes settled on her throat, where the bruise had darkened further, deep violet edging toward black. "Because you have begun to remember," he said. Night fell. Rain intensified, drumming against the roof in relentless waves. At 8:17 p.m., the electricity failed. The house plunged into darkness. Only candlelight remained, small, trembling islands in an expanding sea of shadow. The temperature dropped sharply. Molly's breath fogged the air. From the hallway came the faint sound of water dripping. She turned. A thin line of moisture crept beneath the closed front door, spreading slowly across the floorboards. Not rainwater. Too dark. Too thick. The smell reached her seconds later, river mud and the sour rot of long-submerged wood. The dripping sound grew louder. Then another sound emerged beneath it. A slow dragging. Fiber against wood. Unmistakable now. The sacred thread across the doorway quivered violently. One strand snapped with a sound as soft as a breaking hair. Her grandmother gasped. Ajarn Somchai rose slowly to his feet. No one moved toward the door. The dragging sound stopped inches beyond it. Silence pressed inward from all sides. Then, from the other side of the wood, came 3 slow knocks. Not loud, but deliberate. Patient. Waiting. Molly felt the bruise around her throat throb in answer. Outside, thunder rolled across the darkened fields. Inside, something leaned its unseen weight against the door. And the remaining threads strained to hold.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The Road That Refused to End. The knocking did not return. Not that night, not again before dawn. Yet no one in the house slept. The remaining sacred threads held until morning, though each strand sagged as if exhausted from resisting an unseen weight. When Ajarn Somchai opened the door at first light, the dark moisture seeping beneath it had vanished. The wood was dry. The air outside smelled only of wet grass and cooling earth. But on the threshold lay a single fiber. Coarse. Brown. Frayed at one end, as though torn from a rope under strain. The Ajarn burned it without comment. By mid-morning, he announced they could not wait any longer. "It has begun to cross boundaries," he said. "If we delay, it will no longer need permission to enter." Molly's grandmother gripped her hand. "Then it must be cut away." The Ajarn shook his head. "Nothing sworn before the earth can be cut easily." He looked toward the road leading away from the house. "We must go to Wat Khao Kam." Even speaking the name seemed to thicken the air. They departed before noon in an old pickup truck that rattled over the uneven road like loose bones in a box. The sky hung low and colorless. Clouds stretched thin across a washed-out horizon. Heat rose from the asphalt in wavering distortions that made distant shapes shimmer and dissolve. For the first several kilometers, the journey felt ordinary. Rice fields, utility poles, roadside spirit houses adorned with fresh marigolds. Then the paved road ended. Gravel replaced asphalt, houses thinned, trees pressed closer to the roadside, their branches leaning inward as though narrowing the sky. No birds crossed overhead. The Ajarn drove without speaking. Molly watched the rearview mirror. At first she saw only the pale dust rising behind them. Then she noticed something else. A darker line in the road. A long, narrow groove trailing in the center of the dust plume, appearing. Disappearing, then appearing again. As though something dragged behind them at a distance just beyond sight. She blinked. The groove vanished. When she looked again, the dust lay smooth and undisturbed. She did not mention it. They passed a small roadside shrine wrapped in faded red cloth. Dozens of broken clay roosters surrounded it, offerings left by farmers seeking protection. Every rooster statue faced the road. Every painted eye had been scratched away. Molly felt her stomach tighten. Her grandmother whispered a prayer. The truck continued. After an hour, the air grew noticeably cooler. Mist gathered in low pockets along the ground, thin at first, then thickening until the road seemed to float between pale banks of shifting vapor. The Ajarn turned on the headlights, though daylight had not yet faded. "We are close," he said. "How far?" Molly asked. He did not answer. The road narrowed to a single dirt track flanked by dense bamboo. Their branches clattered together overhead in dry, hollow knocks, though no wind stirred the leaves. The truck's engine began to struggle. Not sputtering. Straining. As though pulling weight far greater than the vehicle itself. Molly's ears popped. Pressure built behind her eyes. The mist swallowed the road behind them completely. When she twisted in her seat to look back, she saw only blank whiteness. No tire tracks. No path. No sign the world they left still existed. Minutes stretched. Or hours. Time loosened its grip. The Ajarn's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sweat traced thin lines down his temples despite the chill in the cab. Then the engine died. The truck rolled to a slow stop. No mechanical failure sound followed, only a sudden, immense silence. The bamboo stopped knocking. The air stopped moving. Even the insects had vanished. "We walk from here," the Ajarn said. No one asked why. The path ahead was barely visible. A narrow strip of trampled earth winding into dense trees. The mist lay thick between the trunks, drifting in slow currents that parted reluctantly as they stepped forward. Their footsteps made no sound. Molly noticed this after several paces. She looked down. Her shoes pressed into the damp soil, leaving clear impressions. She turned slightly to glance behind. Her grandmother's footprints were visible. The Ajarn's too. But between them, a third set of impressions formed intermittently in the soft earth. Long, narrow, parallel grooves, appearing for a step or two. Then gone. Her throat tightened. "Do not stop," the Ajarn said quietly, without turning. They walked. The mist thickened, muting distance and swallowing depth. Bamboo gave way to taller trees whose roots coiled above ground like petrified serpents. The air smelled of wet bark and old water. Then Molly heard it. Faint. Behind them. Fiber brushing against soil. Dragging. Slow. Unhurried. Her grandmother's grip tightened painfully around her hand. No one turned. The forest thinned without warning. Before them stood the temple grounds. Wat Khao Kham rose from the mist like a memory half erased by time. Stone steps fractured by creeping roots led upward to a main hall whose roof tiles sagged in uneven lines. Dark streaks marked the walls where rain had carved paths over decades. No bells hung from the eaves. Only rusted hooks remained. The air within the compound felt heavier, as though sound itself had difficulty moving. Molly stepped through the broken gate. The temperature dropped instantly. Behind them, the mist halted at the threshold, as if unwilling to cross. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then, somewhere deep within the empty temple, wood creaked. A slow settling sound. Like a structure adjusting to a new weight inside it. Ajarn Somchai exhaled slowly. "We have been allowed to enter," he said. Molly swallowed. "Allowed?" The Ajarn did not answer. From behind them, at the edge of the gate, the mist stirred. Something unseen reached the boundary. And waited. Chapter 8. The hall where prayers no longer rose. The temple courtyard held a silence unlike any Molly had known. It was not peaceful. It was watchful. Cracked stone tiles spread beneath their feet, mottled with moss and black stains left by decades of monsoon rain. The air carried the damp scent of old incense, mold, and something deeper, the mineral cold of enclosed earth. No insects hummed. No birds nested beneath the eaves. Even the wind seemed to skirt the temple walls rather than pass through. The main hall loomed ahead, its wooden doors hanging partially ajar. Once lacquered red, they had faded into a dull brown, their surfaces blistered and peeling like burned skin. Faded gold leaf clung in patches where guardian figures had been painted to ward away malevolent forces. Most of the gold had flaked away. The guardians' faces were nearly erased. Ajahn Somchai stopped at the base of the steps. He removed his shoes. Molly and her grandmother followed. The stone beneath Molly's bare feet was unnaturally cold, not the coolness of shade, but the chill of something that had never known sunlight. They ascended in silence. Each step produced a hollow echo that seemed to linger too long, as though the sound had nowhere to go. At the threshold, the Ajahn paused. He pressed his palms together and bowed, not only in reverence, but in acknowledgement. Then he stepped inside. The interior swallowed light. Though daylight streamed through gaps in the roof, it did not illuminate so much as hang in pale shafts suspended in dust-choked air. The hall smelled of extinguished candles and old smoke trapped in wood grain. A large Buddha image sat at the far end, its surface cracked, patches of gold leaf clinging to the stone like remnants of memory. Thin fractures ran across its serene face, giving the illusion of an expression straining to hold its calm. Offerings long since decayed lay hardened on the altar. Dried garlands hung like brittle rings of bone. Molly felt pressure build in her ears as they stepped fully inside, as if the air density had shifted. Behind them, the doors creaked softly, not closing, settling. Ajahn Somchai moved slowly through the hall, examining the floor, the beams, the altar base. His fingers traced faint chalk lines barely visible against the darkened wood, remnants of rituals performed long ago. This place was not abandoned, he murmured. It was sealed. Molly swallowed. By monks? He did not look at her. By fear. They stopped near the center of the hall. The Ajahn set down his satchel and removed ritual items with careful precision: candles of black wax, bundles of dried herbs, small bowls of ash, and a coil of white thread. As he worked, Molly became aware of the sound. At first she thought it was the faint settling of wood. Then she realized it had rhythm. A slow, intermittent creak. Above them. She looked up. The beams vanished into shadow. The sound came again. A faint tightening strain. Fiber underweight. Her chest tightened. Do not look upward for long, the Ajahn said quietly. Some things notice when they are acknowledged. She lowered her gaze quickly. Her grandmother knelt beside her, whispering prayers. The words trembled, dissolving into breath before fully forming. The air grew colder. Molly could see her exhale. But the candle flames remained steady. Ajahn Somchai lit the black candles one by one, placing them in a circle around the center of the hall. Their flames burned low and steady, producing almost no smoke. When the final candle was lit, the temperature dropped further. The hall darkened, not from loss of light, but from an encroaching dimness that seemed to absorb illumination itself. Molly felt it then. Not a touch. Not breath. A nearness. Behind her left shoulder. The same patient closeness she had felt for weeks, now intensified. As if the distance between them had narrowed to the width of a whisper. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She did not turn. From somewhere near the altar came a faint tapping sound. Once. Then again. Like fingernails striking hollow wood from within. Her grandmother's whispering faltered. Ajahn Somchai's chanting began, low, resonant, steady as a heartbeat. The air thickened with each syllable. Dust drifted through shafts of light in slow spirals, as if disturbed by movement too subtle to see. The creaking sound above them deepened. Not louder. Closer. Molly felt a sudden, sharp pressure at the base of her throat, as though something invisible hovered inches from her skin. Her breath caught. The black candle flames bent inward simultaneously. Not from wind. Toward the center of the circle. Toward her. The tapping near the altar became a dragging sound. Slow. Fibrous. Approaching across unseen surfaces. Ajahn Somchai's chant did not falter, but sweat ran freely down his temples. The boundary is thin here, he said between phrases. Do not leave the circle once we begin. A faint line appeared in the dust beyond the candlelight. A narrow groove. Forming slowly. Advancing inch by inch toward the edge of the ritual space. Molly's vision blurred. The pressure at her throat tightened. Then, from somewhere deep within the hall, beneath wood and stone and years of silence, came a sound like distant thunder rolling through earth. The Buddha statue gave a soft cracking sound. A thin line spread across its chest. The air turned deathly cold. And from the darkness beyond the candlelight, something exhaled. Slow. Patient. Recognizing. The groove in the dust stopped at the edge of the circle. Waiting.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Bell That Should Not Ring. Night gathered around the temple like a closing fist. What little daylight had filtered through the fractured roof was gone, replaced by a depthless darkness that seemed to absorb the candlelight rather than retreat from it. The black candles burned low and unwavering, their flames thin and elongated, bending inward toward Molly as though drawn by a breath she could not feel. The groove in the dust remained at the circle's edge. Waiting. Ajahn Somchai's chanting continued in a steady rhythm, but the air resisted each syllable now, pressing against the sound until his voice seemed to travel no farther than the candlelight. Outside the hall, the world had vanished. No wind, no insects, no distant engines from unseen roads. Only stillness. Then, without warning, the temperature dropped so sharply that Molly's breath turned to white mist before her lips. Her grandmother's whispering stopped. The silence that followed was immense. And in that silence, something shifted above them. A slow tightening strain. Fiber drawing taut. Molly squeezed her eyes shut. The sound did not stop. A low vibration began beneath the floor. At first it resembled distant thunder, too faint to locate. Then it deepened into a resonance that seemed to rise through the cracked tiles and into her bones, setting her teeth on edge. The Buddha statue emitted a faint grinding sound, as though stone pressed against stone from within. Ajahn Somchai's chanting grew louder. Not stronger, louder, as if volume alone could resist what gathered. The vibration intensified. Dust trembled across the floor in delicate ripples. The black candle flames thinned to needlepoints. Then it came. A bell tone. Deep. Metallic. Resonant beyond its volume. The sound did not enter the hall. It emerged from it. Molly's eyes snapped open. There were no bells in the temple. She had seen the rusted hooks where they once hung. Yet the tone continued, a slow, sonorous reverberation that seemed to roll through the air and into the hollow spaces inside her chest. Her grandmother cried out softly, covering her ears. The Ajahns' chanting faltered for the first time. The bell sounded again. Closer. Not louder, nearer. As if descending through layers of space. The vibration in the floor aligned with the tone, each resonance striking through Molly's bones with nauseating precision. The groove in the dust trembled. Then it advanced. 1 inch. Stopped. Another bell tone sounded. The black candles bent inward sharply, flames flattening toward the center of the circle. A pressure wave passed through the hall, extinguishing all sound for a fraction of a second. In that vacuum of silence, Molly heard it. Breathing. Not behind her. Not beside her. Within the circle. She could not see its source. But the mist of her own breath drifted sideways, drawn toward a shape forming in the air before her, a distortion. Subtle yet unmistakable, like heat shimmering above asphalt. The bell sounded again. This time the Buddha statue cracked audibly, a thin fracture spreading across the serene face, splitting one eye. Her grandmother sobbed. The Ajahn slammed his palm against the floor, shouting a command in a language that struck the air like breaking stone. The distortion thickened. Condensation formed in the empty air, outlining shoulders, the suggestion of a torso, the faint contour of a head bowed at an unnatural angle. The groove in the dust deepened, as though pressed by weight now partially present. The bell tone stretched longer, vibrating through the hall until the wooden beams above them shuddered in answer. From the darkness beyond the candlelight came a soft dragging sound. But now it came from multiple directions. Encircling. Listening. The Ajahn's voice hardened into sharp syllables of command. You stand at the threshold, he said into the cold air. You are seen. The condensation shape quivered. The temperature dropped further. Molly felt the bruised ring at her throat pulse with sudden heat, a burning contrast to the freezing air. The bell sounded again. And this time, beneath its resonance, another sound emerged. A strained fiber tightening. The distortion leaned closer. Molly could not move. Her lungs refused breath. The mist in the air condensed further, tracing the outline of a rope descending from above, not fully visible, but suggested by the way moisture gathered along an invisible line. The rope tightened. The bell stopped. The silence that followed roared. Then, inches from Molly's face, something exhaled. The condensation scattered. The candle flames flared violently outward. And from deep within the temple's foundations came a reverberation like a door opening beneath the earth. The groove in the dust stopped at the circle's edge once more. Waiting. Listening. Recognizing. Ajarn Samchai's voice dropped to a whisper. It has heard the call. Outside the hall, beyond the broken doors, the mist surged forward to the threshold. And held. As if awaiting permission to enter. Chapter 10. The Circle of Ash and Breath. The bell did not sound again. Yet the echo of its last vibration lingered inside Molly's chest, as though her bones had memorized its frequency. The air in the temple hall felt altered now, denser, resistant, every breath requiring effort. Ajarn Samchai moved quickly. Whatever window had opened, he intended to use it before it closed. From his satchel he withdrew a small clay bowl filled with gray ash mixed with crushed herbs and fragments of charred palm leaf scripture. Kneeling at the center of the hall, he began drawing a second circle just inside the ring of black candles. His fingers moving with deliberate precision. The ash left a dull, pale line against the dark floor. "Do not step beyond this boundary," he said without looking up. "If the circle breaks, it will not need to ask again." Molly swallowed and nodded. Her grandmother squeezed her hand once, then released it, retreating to kneel just beyond the candle ring. The ash circle closed. The temperature dropped further. Ajarn Samchai dipped his thumb into a vial of cloudy oil and pressed a mark onto Molly's forehead. The liquid smelled faintly sweet, but beneath it lingered the odor of damp earth and old wood. "Breathe slowly," he said, "no matter what you hear." He lit a bundle of dried herbs. Bitter smoke rose immediately, thick and acrid, burning the back of Molly's throat and coating her tongue with a taste like iron and dust. Then he began the invocation. His voice resonated low and rhythmic, each syllable measured, each pause exact. The chant did not seem directed outward, but downward, into the floor, into the earth beneath the temple, into whatever lay waiting in the deep places below. The ash circle darkened as if absorbing moisture from the air. The black candle flames shortened, steady and narrow. Beyond the circle, the groove in the dust quivered. At first, the manifestation came as pressure. Not touch. Not breath. Pressure building in the air itself, compressing the space before Molly until her lungs felt constrained, as though the atmosphere had thickened into invisible water. Her ears rang. The bruised ring around her throat throbbed. The chant deepened. A faint distortion appeared within the circle's boundary, subtle, like heat shimmering above stone. Candlelight bent around it, curving inward toward a shape not yet fully present. Molly's pulse hammered. The distortion lengthened. Condensation gathered in the cold air, outlining the slope of shoulders, the bowed angle of a head, the slack descent of something unseen from above. The smell arrived next. Damp rope. River mud. Wood long submerged and slowly rotting in dark water. Her stomach lurched. The ash circle trembled. Ajarn Samchai's voice sharpened, syllables striking like blows. "You stand between worlds," he intoned. "You are bound by vow. You are bound by earth. You are bound by witness." The condensation thickened. The suggestion of a torso solidified into shadow within vapor. The air around the shape pulsed, as though struggling to sustain form. Molly felt cold brush her throat. Her breath hitched. The rope mark around her neck burned. A faint fibrous creak sounded above them. The distortion lifted its head. Where eyes should have been, darkness pooled, deeper than shadow. absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Her grandmother whimpered softly. Ajarn Samchai did not stop chanting. The black candle flames leaned inward sharply. The air pressure intensified. Molly felt invisible fibers brush the base of her throat, exploratory. Intimate, patient. Her hands twitched in her lap. She did not raise them. The Ajarn's voice rose. What was sworn may be witnessed. What was bound may be spoken. What was promised may be released. The condensation figure trembled violently. The groove in the dust deepened. A second indentation formed beside it, as though weight had shifted. Then the sound came. Not from its mouth. From the tightening fibers above. A strained vibration. A voice woven through tension and memory. You left. The words did not pass through air. They formed inside Molly's chest. Her vision blurred with sudden tears. The pressure at her throat increased. Ajarn Samchai slammed his palm into the floor. You stand in witness, he commanded. Speak what binds you. The air pulsed. The figure leaned closer. The scent of damp earth intensified until Molly tasted it. Her grandmother began sobbing prayers. The temple beams creaked overhead. A slow tightening strain echoing through the hall. Molly's lungs refused air. The rope mark burned like heated iron. The figure's outline sharpened, garments hanging stiff and dark. Neck stretched beneath an unseen weight. The voice vibrated again. You promised? The ash circle flickered. A thin fracture line appeared across its surface, as though pressure pushed upward from below. Ajarn Samchai's chanting became a shout. Do not accept what is not yours. The candle flames flared outward violently. The condensation form recoiled, then surged forward again, pressing against the boundary. The ash circle held. Barely. The bruise around Molly's throat pulsed in time with the tightening fibers above. And in the deep silence between heartbeats, she felt it. Not rage. Not hatred. Something older. Something patient. Something that had waited through centuries of soil, rain, and forgetting. Waiting for her to answer. The air trembled. The boundary thinned. The ritual had begun. And it would not stop until the vow was broken. Or fulfilled.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The man who waited in the rope's shadow. The ash circle trembled. Not from wind. Not from movement. From pressure building beneath it, as if the earth itself strained against the boundary drawn upon its surface. Ajarn Samchai's chanting no longer echoed. The air had thickened too much to carry sound. Each syllable seemed forced into existence, pressed outward by will alone. Inside the circle, the condensation shape shuddered. Then it deepened. Darkness gathered where vapor had floated moments before, pooling into substance. The outline sharpened. Shoulders draped in stiff, ancient cloth, arms hanging unnaturally straight, fingers elongated by shadow. The rope was no longer suggested. It was present. Not fully solid, yet unmistakable, a length descending from unseen height, its fibers swollen and dark, indenting the broken flesh of the neck it held. Molly's breath vanished. The figure's feet hovered inches above the floor. No dust shifted beneath them. No weight touched the earth. Yet the groove outside the circle deepened, as though something heavy still hung between worlds. The smell intensified, damp fiber, stagnant water, and the sweet sour rot of wood that had slept beneath mud for generations. Her grandmother sobbed openly now. Ajarn Samchai did not stop. You stand in witness, he commanded, voice raw. You stand in vow. You stand in the place between breath and soil. The figure lifted its head. The face emerged. Skin stretched dark and taut. Lips split and dry. A bruised ligature mark cut deep into the neck. Flesh pressed inward where fiber had crushed life from it. The eyes opened. They were not empty. They were depthless. Darkness layered upon darkness, like a well that had never known light. Molly felt her chest constrict as if her ribs had tightened into a cage too small for breath. The figure swayed slightly. Not from air. From memory. When it spoke, the sound did not pass through its mouth. The rope tightened. Fibers vibrated. The voice came through tension and strain. Molly? Her name formed inside her bones. Her vision fractured with tears. Ajahn Somchai struck the floor with his palm again. You address the living through witness. He said sharply. You will not claim what is not given. The rope creaked. The figure tilted its head. Fragments of mud fell from its lips, dissolving before touching the ground. I waited. The temperature dropped so sharply frost traced the edges of the ash line. Molly felt cold press against her throat, not tightening yet, only resting there, familiar as remembered touch. Her fingers twitched. She did not raise them. Ajahn Somchai's chant hardened into commands. You died bound to earth. You remained bound to vow. But you do not hold dominion over breath. The figure leaned forward. The air resisted its movement, warping around its form like water around a descending stone. The rope above creaked louder. Molly heard it then. Not as sound, but as sensation. Weight. Endless weight suspended between worlds. The figure's voice vibrated again. Under the tamarind tree. Images burst behind Molly's eyes. Lantern light shuddering in wind. Garlands slipping into mud. The slow turning of a body at dawn. Her chest heaved with a sob she did not release. You left? The ash circle flickered. A thin fracture line crept along its edge, spreading like a hairline crack in ice. Ajahn Somchai shouted a syllable that struck the air like breaking stone. The crack stopped. The figure did not retreat. Instead, its arm lifted. The motion was slow, resistant, as if the air itself tried to deny it movement. Its hand extended toward Molly. Fingers darkened, swollen by death, yet unmistakably human. Reaching. Not grasping. Reaching. Her grandmother cried out, "Do not touch him." But the hand stopped inches from the boundary. Unable to cross. The rope tightened. The fibers groaned under unseen strain. The voice emerged again, more fragile now, stretched thin across time. You promised to return? The bruise around Molly's throat burned with sudden heat. Tears spilled freely down her face. Her lungs trembled with the effort to breathe. She felt it clearly now. Not rage. Not vengeance. But waiting. A waiting so long it had hollowed itself into suffering. Ajahn Somchai's voice cut through the cold air. Compassion is not surrender, he warned. Pity is the door through which bonds renew. The figure trembled violently. The rope twisted. The ash circle dimmed as though absorbing rising pressure from below. From deep beneath the temple floor came a low reverberation, not a sound, but a shifting, as though the earth adjusted its weight to listen. The figure leaned closer. The darkness of its eyes deepened. For a moment, Molly felt herself tipping toward it, drawn not by force, but by recognition. By memory. By a promise spoken beneath lantern light in youthful certainty. The rope creaked sharply. The candle flames flattened toward the floor. The air pulsed. And the figure's voice, woven through fiber and time, whispered, "Come back." The ash circle flickered again. This time, the fracture line lengthened. Ajahn Somchai shouted, his voice breaking with strain. "Do not answer." The temple beams groaned overhead. Dust fell in thin streams from the rafters. The boundary thinned to a breath. And within that breath, the man who had waited through centuries hovered before her, not as a monster. Not as a memory. But as a vow that refused to die. Chapter 12. The choice between mercy and release. The fracture in the ash circle spread another inch. It did not crumble. It thinned. Like ice stretched over dark water. Ajahn Somchai's chanting had become raw, each syllable torn from his throat with visible effort. Sweat streamed down his face. Yet the air around them remained deathly cold. Frost crept along the outer edge of the circle, tracing pale veins through dust and cracked tile. The figure did not retreat. It hovered at the boundary, suspended in a stillness that felt heavier than movement. Its outstretched hand remained inches from the ash line. Waiting. Molly could hear the fibers of the rope above it tightening, not as sound, but as pressure reverberating through her bones, a suspended weight straining against time itself. Her throat burned beneath the bruise. Her pulse matched the slow creak of tension overhead. "Come back." The voice no longer vibrated with force. It frayed, worn thin by centuries of waiting. Her grandmother sobbed prayers that dissolved into broken syllables. Ajahn Somchai struck the floor again. "You are not bound to follow the dead," he said hoarsely. The vow ended with breath. The figure's head tilted slightly, as though listening. Mud seeped from its lips and vanished before touching the floor. Breath ended. The rope twisted. A soft fibrous groan answered from above. The vow remained. The ash circle dimmed. The candle flames thinned to trembling threads of light. Molly felt something shift inside her chest, not a force pulling outward, but a loosening, as if a knot tied long before her birth had begun to stir. Memories pressed at the edges of her consciousness. Lantern light swaying in humid night air. Garlands damp against her palms. The weight of eyes watching beneath the tamarind tree. Fear louder than love. Footsteps retreating into darkness. And behind it all, the sound of rope tightening at dawn. Tears slid silently down her face. "I was afraid," she whispered, her voice barely air. Ajahn Somchai turned sharply. "Do not speak to it." But the figure trembled violently. The rope tightened with a strained creak. The dark hollows of its eyes seemed to deepen, not with hunger, but with unbearable recognition. "You ran? I thought I could return," she said, breath shaking. "I thought time would forgive me." The air pulsed. The ash circle flickered. A thin line split further along its edge. Ajahn Somchai's voice sharpened with urgency. "Compassion binds as surely as vows. Do not give it your breath." The figure leaned closer. The temperature plunged. Frost spread across the floor like pale veins. The earth remembered. The temple beams groaned. Dust fell in slow drifting threads. Molly felt pressure gather behind her sternum, grief not entirely her own. Sorrow compressed into centuries of silence. She saw him clearly now. Not as the suspended corpse. Not as the hollow-eyed apparition. But as the young soldier beneath lantern light, hopeful, uncertain, waiting for a future that never arrived. The rope above creaked again. The sound trembled through her ribs. "I cannot follow you into death," she whispered. The figure shuddered. The air thickened. For the first time, something like pain crossed its face, a distortion pulling through the rigidity of death. "Then I remain." The words trembled through the fibers. The ash circle dimmed further. The fracture widened. Ajahn Somchai's chant broke into sharp commands. "You must release the vow. Speak release, or it will claim continuance." The candle flames bent inward violently. The air pressed down like deep water. Molly felt the invisible pressure at her throat begin to tighten, not in violence, but in inevitability. Waiting for her answer. Waiting for permission. Her grandmother cried out, "Child, let him go." The rope above groaned with unbearable strain. The temple floor vibrated faintly beneath her knees. Molly closed her eyes. Inside the darkness behind them, she felt the weight of 2 lifetimes balancing on a single breath. "I remember," she whispered. The figure leaned closer. The ash circle flickered to near invisibility. "But I release you." The air stopped. Not silence. Absence. Even the cold paused. The rope froze mid-strain. Ajahn Somchai inhaled sharply. The figure trembled, not with resistance, but with something unraveling. Molly's voice broke as she forced the final words into the air. "I release you from the promise made beneath the tamarind tree. I release you from waiting. I release you from me." The candle flames collapsed to embers. The fracture in the ash circle halted. The rope above gave a long, shuddering creak. The figure's outstretched hand faltered. For a moment, one fragile, impossible moment, the darkness within its eyes loosened. Not light, but the memory of it. The temple groaned around them. Something deep beneath the earth shifted, as though an ancient tension had eased by a single breath. Then the rope twisted sharply. The air convulsed, and the boundary between release and ruin thinned to the width of a whisper.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. When the earth refused the release. For one suspended instant, the temple seemed to exhale. The crushing pressure in the air loosened. The invisible tightening at Molly's throat slackened. Even the cold that had settled into the stones appeared to recede by a fraction too small to measure. The figure before her trembled. Its outstretched hand faltered mid-reach, fingers curling inward as though losing strength after centuries of strain. The dark hollows of its eyes flickered, not with light, but with the memory of it. The rope above gave a long, fraying creak. Ajahn Somchai did not relax. "Hold your breath," he whispered. "Release is not departure." The ash circle glowed faintly where the fracture had halted, its pale line trembling as though struggling to remember its shape. Then the air convulsed. Not wind. Not movement. A violent pressure wave burst outward from the space between Molly and the suspended figure. Slamming into the candle ring, flames flattened to the floor, then snapped upright in frantic oscillations. Her grandmother screamed. The Buddha statue cracked with a sharp report, a fracture racing down its torso like lightning trapped in stone. The rope twisted. A sound tore through the hall, not a voice, not a cry, but a resonance of unbearable tension releasing all at once. The figure jerked upward violently. The rope tightened with a fibrous scream. And from beneath the temple floor came a thunderous impact, as though something deep below had struck the earth in refusal. The temperature plunged. Frost exploded across the tiles in branching patterns. The ash circle dimmed. Outside the candlelight, dust lifted in spiraling currents, forming brief, writhing shapes that dissolved before they could fully form. Ajahn Somchai shouted over the rising pressure. The vow was witnessed by earth and ancestor. Release must be accepted. The rope above groaned, twisting tighter. The figure convulsed, suspended between ascent and collapse. Mud streamed from its mouth in thick ribbons that evaporated before striking the ground. The dark hollows of its eyes widened. Not in rage. In terror. The temple floor shuddered. From beyond the hall doors came a low rushing sound, not wind, but something moving through mist, through trees, through memory itself. The boundary at the entrance flickered. The mist surged forward. Stopped. Pressed. As if countless unseen forms gathered at the threshold, drawn by the breaking of an ancient bond. The candle flames turned blue. Molly felt the bruise around her throat burn, then freeze, then burn again in violent pulses. The rope tightened further. Fibers snapped. One. Then another. Each break rang through the hall like a plucked wire. The figure spasmed. For a moment its shape blurred, young soldier and hanging corpse overlapping in impossible dissonance. Lantern light and dawn mist. Hope and death. Promise and abandonment. Ajahn Somchai slammed both palms into the floor, shouting words that struck the air like hammer blows. You are released. You are witnessed. You are no longer bound. The floor bucked beneath them. A deep fissure split one of the temple tiles just beyond the ash circle. A jagged crack opening like a dark mouth in the stone. Cold air surged upward from below, carrying the smell of wet earth sealed for centuries. The rope above shrieked under sudden strain. The figure jerked downward, then upward again, suspended between forces pulling in opposite directions. Molly felt it then, not outside, but inside her chest. A tearing sensation, as though threads woven through her ribs were being pulled free one by one. She gasped. Ajahn Somchai's voice broke. Do not reclaim what you have released. The mist at the doorway surged again, pressing against an invisible boundary, writhing in silent urgency. The Buddha statue's fractured face shed a thin cascade of dust. The rope twisted violently. A final strand snapped. The sound rang through the hall like metal tearing. The figure convulsed. For an instant, the dark hollows of its eyes cleared. And in that instant, Molly saw him, not the dead man, not the apparition, but the young soldier beneath the tamarind tree. Relief breaking across his face like dawn after endless night. Then the rope recoiled. The air imploded inward. The candle flames extinguished simultaneously. Darkness slammed into the hall. A shockwave burst outward, hurling dust and fragments across the floor. Her grandmother cried out. The temple beams groaned like a structure remembering collapse. From deep below, something shifted, not in resistance now, but in acceptance. The rope's remaining fibers disintegrated into drifting strands of dark dust. The suspended shape fractured into fragments of shadow and condensation, unraveling upward like smoke pulled through unseen cracks in the air. The pressure vanished. Not slowly. Instantly. Silence fell with such completeness it roared in Molly's ears. The ash circle lay dim but intact. Frost melted into thin rivulets that vanished before reaching the cracks in the stone. At the threshold, the mist withdrew. Slowly. Reluctantly. As though something had been taken from it. Ajahn Somchai collapsed onto one hand, breath ragged. It is done, he whispered. But his eyes remained fixed on the dark space where the figure had hovered. Molly sat frozen, her chest aching with the echo of threads torn free. The bruise around her throat had faded to a faint gray shadow. The hall remained silent. Yet from high above, in the unseen rafters lost to darkness, a single fiber drifted downward, turning slowly in the cold air, before dissolving before it touched the floor. Chapter 14. The silence that demanded a price. For a long time, no one moved. The temple hall remained suspended in a stillness so complete it felt constructed rather than natural, a silence laid carefully over fractured stone. Extinguished candles, and dust settling in slow, reluctant spirals. Molly's ears rang with the absence of sound. Where pressure had crushed the air moments before, there was now only space, thin, hollow, almost fragile. Each breath she drew felt unfamiliar, as though her lungs had forgotten how to expand without resistance. The bruise around her throat had faded to a dull gray shadow. The tightening was gone. For the first time in weeks, nothing rested against the back of her neck. Ajahn Somchai remained kneeling, one hand braced against the cracked tile floor. His shoulders rose and fell with slow, uneven breaths. The strength that had anchored his voice during the ritual seemed to have drained from him, leaving only exhaustion etched into the deep lines of his face. Her grandmother whispered, "Is it over?" The Ajahn did not answer immediately. He studied the air where the figure had dissolved, eyes sharp despite his fatigue, as though expecting the shape to gather itself again from cold and memory. At last he spoke. "The vow has been released." The words did not echo. They settled. But what is released does not vanish. He added quietly, "It returns to where it belongs." Molly swallowed, her throat tender but free. "And where is that?" The Ajahn's gaze shifted downward, to the cracked tile where the fissure had opened during the convulsion. "To earth," he said. They waited until the first pale hint of dawn filtered through the broken roof before extinguishing the remaining embers and gathering the ritual objects. The black candles had collapsed into warped pools of hardened wax. The ash circle lay intact but faint, its edges blurred as though the floor itself had begun reclaiming it. When Molly rose, her legs trembled with exhaustion. But the oppressive weight that had followed her for months was gone. Not lifted. Gone. She noticed it in the small things, the ease of breath, the absence of that constant awareness just beyond her shoulder, the way silence no longer seemed occupied. Yet the temple did not feel empty. It felt settled, as if a tension held too long within its beams and stones had finally eased. Outside, the mist had retreated into the forest, lingering in low pockets between roots and fallen leaves. The air smelled of wet bark and cooling earth. For the first time since their arrival, birds called tentatively from distant branches, their sounds thin but real. Molly stepped through the broken gate and paused. The world felt larger. Color had returned to the morning. She had not realized how muted everything had been. Her grandmother touched her shoulder gently. "You are lighter," she said. Molly did not trust her voice enough to answer. Behind them, Ajahn Somchai stood at the threshold of the temple grounds, one hand resting on the weathered gatepost. His posture had changed. The rigid focus that had sustained him through the ritual was gone, replaced by a stillness that did not look like rest. "Master?" Molly said softly. He did not respond. She stepped closer. His eyes were open, fixed on the temple hall beyond the courtyard. Unblinking. For a terrible moment she thought he was listening for something only he could hear. Then his knees gave way. He collapsed forward before either woman could reach him. They carried him beneath the shade of a tamarind tree near the edge of the compound. His breathing was shallow, each inhale a fragile thread, each exhale thinner than the last. Molly knelt beside him, panic rising in her chest. "Please," she whispered, "you must stay." His eyes shifted toward her. Not fearful. Not surprised. Only tired. The bond resisted, he murmured. Such vows anchor themselves deeply. To witness their release requires balance. His fingers trembled as he lifted his hand slightly, as if weighing something invisible in the air between them. "Breath for breath," he said. Her grandmother began to weep. Molly shook her head. "No, there must be another way." Ajahn Somchai's gaze softened. Release was given, he whispered. Balance must answer. The morning light strengthened through the trees, falling across his face in warm bands of gold. For a brief moment, he looked younger, the severity eased from his features. The lines of strain smoothed into something almost peaceful. "You will live unbound," he said. "Do not weave new promises in fear." His breath left him slowly. It did not return. The birds continued calling. Wind moved gently through the leaves above. The world did not pause. They buried him at the edge of the temple grounds, beneath the tamarind tree where roots twisted deep into the soil. The earth was soft from night moisture, yielding easily beneath their hands. Molly placed the white thread bracelet he had tied around her wrist atop the grave before the final layer of soil covered it. The morning sun climbed. Mist dissolved. By the time they began the journey home, the road behind them remained visible. No grooves marred the dust. No unseen weight dragged at the edge of sight. Days passed. Then weeks. Life resumed its ordinary rhythms. Men spoke to Molly without unease. Stray dogs no longer whimpered at her approach. Temple bells rang clear and undisturbed when stirred by wind. At night, she slept. No breath warmed the air beside her ear. No pressure rested against her throat. No dreams of mud and rope followed her into darkness. Yet sometimes, in the hour before dawn, she woke with the faint sensation that something had shifted in the balance of the world, not wrong, not threatening, but altered, like a scale that had finally settled after bearing uneven weight for too long. And in those quiet moments, she would whisper a prayer for the man beneath the tamarind tree, and for the soldier who had finally stopped waiting. The world had returned to its natural order. But order, she now understood, was never without cost.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Echo That Remained. The first months passed gently. Rain returned to the fields in steady rhythms, filling irrigation channels and turning the paddies into mirrors of pale sky. Vendors called from roadside stalls. Children raced bicycles along dusty paths. Temple bells rang clear in the morning air, their tones bright and unbroken. Life resumed its ordinary shape. And for the first time in nearly a year, Molly moved through it without the sensation of being followed. Sleep came easily. Silence felt empty instead of occupied. Breath no longer fogged the air beside her in the middle of the night. The bruise at her throat faded completely. Even the faint gray shadow disappeared. Neighbors who once avoided her now lingered in conversation. Her laughter, tentative at first, returned in quiet bursts that surprised her as much as anyone. Once, while passing a roadside shrine, she realized the incense smoke drifted normally around her instead of recoiling. The world had accepted her again. Or perhaps she had been returned to it. 3 months after the ritual, Molly traveled alone to the temple grounds to offer merit for Ajahn Somchai. Morning light filtered through the trees, turning dew into scattered fragments of gold. The compound no longer felt abandoned. Moss still crept across stone, and roof tiles still sagged with age. But the oppressive weight that had once filled the air was gone. Birdsong threaded through the courtyard. Wind moved freely beneath the eaves. She knelt beside the small grave beneath the tamarind tree and lit incense. Thin smoke rose straight upward, untroubled by unseen currents. "Thank you," She whispered. The words felt insufficient, but sincere. She remained there for a long time, listening to the ordinary sounds of morning, leaves shifting, insects humming, distant water moving through reeds. Nothing answered her prayer. Nothing disturbed the air. And for the first time since she could remember, she felt no unseen attention resting upon her. The journey home was uneventful. The road stretched clear behind her. Dust settled naturally. No mist gathered where it should not. That night, rain fell in a soft, steady curtain. The sound against the roof was comforting, rhythmic enough to lull thought into quiet. Molly slept deeply, dreamless. She woke at 2:13 a.m. She did not know why. The rain had stopped. The house lay in complete darkness. For several seconds she remained still, suspended between sleep and waking, listening to the vast quiet that fills the world when night reaches its deepest hour. No breathing. No pressure. No whisper. She exhaled slowly and closed her eyes again. Then she heard it. A faint sound from the hallway. Not dragging. Not approaching. A soft shift, like weight settling onto wood. Her eyes opened. Moonlight filtered faintly through the window, painting pale shapes across the floor. She listened. Nothing followed. After several moments, she sat up and swung her feet to the floor. The wood was cool beneath her soles as she crossed the room and opened the door. The hallway lay empty. Still. Unremarkable. She almost smiled at herself. Turning back toward her room, she paused. Near the threshold, the faint sheen of moisture glimmered on the floorboards. Just a patch no larger than her palm. She crouched. Touched it. Cool. Water. She lifted her fingers to her nose. No scent of rot. No river mud. Only rain carried by night air. She rose slowly. Perhaps wind had driven droplets beneath the eaves. Perhaps. She closed the door and returned to bed. Sleep came again. Morning light revealed nothing unusual. The patch of moisture had dried. The boards bore no stain. Outside, sunlight glowed warmly across the fields, and birds traced erratic arcs across the brightening sky. Molly prepared tea and opened the front door to let in the fresh air. She stopped. On the wooden threshold lay a single fiber. Thin. Brown. Frayed at one end. So light it stirred with her breath. She stared at it for a long time. The morning breeze lifted. The fiber rolled once, and drifted away into sunlight. Molly remained at the doorway, listening to the ordinary sounds of daybreak. A cart rattled down the road. Someone called to a neighbor. A dog barked in the distance. Life continued. Untroubled. Yet somewhere in the quiet spaces between those sounds, she felt a subtle shift, not a presence, not a weight, but the faintest awareness that balance, once restored, must always be maintained. Some vows end. Some bindings dissolve. And some echoes remain. Not as chains, but as reminders. Molly stepped into the morning light and closed the door behind her. Inside, the house stood silent. At peace. Yet in the dim hallway where moonlight sometimes pooled before dawn, the wood held a faint indentation, so slight it could have been grain in the timber. Or the memory of a line drawn once, long ago, by something that had waited patiently for release. In villages where the night air still carries the scent of rain and incense, elders warn that promises should never be spoken lightly. For the earth remembers. The dead remember. And even when a bond is cut, something of it may linger, not as a chain, but as an echo woven into silence. If you wake in the darkest hour before dawn and feel the air grow suddenly cold, do not rush to turn around. Some things do not seek to harm. Some only wait to be remembered and released.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.